Hello my friends and welcome back to another Slay the Spire 2 tier list and guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be continuing our look at the silence cards with the rare cards. In part 1 and 2 of this tier list I covered the commons and uncommons, so today we're going to go through all the rares. Before I jump into ratings, there are two things that I wanted to quickly cover. In between recording the last two segments and recording this one, there was a patch. It only changed one card for the silent, and it was a rare card, so no need to move anything around there. But it did also swap out one of the bosses, removing the Doormaker and replacing it with the Eon Glass. I haven't had a ton of chances to fight against the Eon Glass yet. I've done a few runs, but there may be some specific things that I'm missing about that boss, so definitely let me know in the comments. Obviously, the game is under active development, so we're still all learning together. But removing the Doormaker did have one major effect, which was making zero-cost card draw even better than it already was, because it was at its worst in that fight. Cards like Prepared and Calculated Gamble and Escape Plan. I've rated all of those S tier already, so again, nothing specific really needs to move around, but those cards are even better than they used to be, thanks to removing the boss that countered them. The second thing is I've now posted the first two parts of the tier list and had a chance to see your comments, and there's a couple cards that I want to adjust based on feedback, because I think I misplaced them the first time around. The first of these is Piercing Wail. This card I put in S tier basically to show that I will take the first Piercing Wail over the first dodge and roll or backflip or something like that most of the time. But I do think that rather than S tier, this card does belong in A tier. You usually don't want more than one of them, and that was kind of the break between S and A tier for the way that I defined the tiers. And there's a lot of fights where Piercing Wail just isn't that exciting in Slay the Spire 2. This was an incredible card in STS 1, but it has gotten worse in the sequel, so I'm going to move it down a tier to A tier. Another card that I wanted to adjust was Snakebite. I had said that this was between C and B tier, and I think it does edge high enough to reach B tier. This is extremely good in Act 1 elite fights and in boss fights in general. Upgrading Snakebite is really efficient, and Retain is just an incredibly strong keyword with a lot of synergy with everything else that the Silent wants to do. So I think all of those factors together do push this card up to B tier. Finally, the last card that I wanted to move around was Dash, which honestly, I don't really know why I was so harsh on this card when I rated it the first time around. I've definitely had Dash perform under rate, but it's never a bad draw, and it's actively good in Act 1. And cards that are actively good in Act 1 and are still relevant draws later on, it's also particularly good against the test subject, because it's a way to add block that's not a skill, so it doesn't give the test subject strength in its first stage. Basically, every other card that's good in Act 1 and remains relevant throughout the game, I've given B tier, so I'm actually going to move Dash up two full tiers, because I think my initial rating was just way off. So I, again, want to thank everyone for the feedback, and I'm very happy to move cards around if I think I've made an error, and we'll continue to move things around based on your feedback, as always. So those are the three cards I really wanted to cover. And with that out of the way, let's get into the rares. First up, Abrasive. So this is a card that I was taking relatively high when I first started playing, and the more that I have played with this card, the higher I've been picking it. Abrasive is a 3-cost power with Sly, so of course you can play it for free when discarding it, and it gives you 1 dexterity and 4 thorns, dealing 4 damage back to any enemy that attacks you. When upgraded, it's 1 dexterity and 6 thorns. Thorns are really good in Slay the Spire 2. There's lots of enemies with multi-attacks. A lot of the most dangerous encounters have multiple enemies in them, and so you'll get multiple value. The thorn value will be multiplied across more than one enemy. And a lot of fights will tend to go long. The Silent likes to sit back and block a lot, and so Thorn's damage adds up to a lot over longer fights, especially because the most dangerous fights in the game, basically all of them the enemies multi-attack in, and so the Thorn's damage can be extremely powerful when it returns. In a fight against, say, the Queen, this can often be 50 damage in the endgame very easily for just this one card, and it's free when you play it because you're almost always going to play it for the Sly cost. Having Sly obviously makes this incredibly strong. Giving you 1 dexterity is both incredibly powerful just on the face of it and extremely synergistic with everything else that the Silent wants to do. And so Abrasive is a card that has just consistently moved up the rankings for me until I'm taking it extremely highly. This card will often end up being a huge amount of damage, saving you a ton of health both by killing enemies faster and by improving all of your blocking cards. I've talked at length throughout this tier list about how good Dexterity is for you, and so I'm going to give it S tier. Just the fact that you can play it for free and it has such incredible value makes this one of the best cards for the Silent, and I'm taking it extremely high these days. It's also not completely ridiculous to play it for the full cost. On a turn where enemies aren't attacking, spending 3 energy on Abrasive is often totally fine. Accelerant. Accelerant is a 1-cost power with poison is triggered 1 additional time, so it'll deal the damage and decrease the poison amount twice in a turn instead of once in a turn. When upgraded, it does it 2 additional times, tripling, or not quite tripling, the damage that you're doing from poison, but making it decrease significantly faster. Accelerant is an extremely cool card with a very high ceiling in terms of its power level, but the best way to think of it when you're evaluating it is as being very similar to Bubble Bubble. It massively increases your poison damage when the enemy already has a bunch of poison on them, and so Accelerant is really good for decks that are great at applying lots of poison, but obviously you need a ton of poison cards in order to make this really strong. It also speeds up your kill, but doesn't add any more total poison value, and so you need to continuously reapply poison in order to make Accelerant work. But when you have a bunch of poison on the enemies, it's going to double or triple the speed at which you kill bosses and elites especially, and in those scenarios, it can be very powerful. Like many cards that require a lot of setup and have a really strong high end, I'm going to give it C tier, because just like Bubble Bubble in a deck that is designed to use Accelerant well, it's very good, but not a lot of decks are going to be able to use it, so most of the time that you see this card, you're going to unfortunately have to skip it, but when you can make it work, it's very, very powerful. It's also one of my favorite cards, so I'm always going to try to make it work, even in decks where it's not very good. Adrenaline. Honestly, there's nothing to say about this card. It's a 0-cost skill that gives you an energy and draws 2 cards and then exhausts. Or when upgraded, gives you 2 energy, draws 2 cards, and then exhausts. So it's +1 card, because you lose the adrenaline but draw 2 more cards, and +1 energy, or +2 when upgraded, making it just free value and incredibly strong in literally every deck. This is a card that you will never skip. You'll never push the skip button instead of taking this card. There are times where you'll take another card over it. Maybe you need more block in your deck, more than you need this acceleration. Maybe you need a win condition, so you'll take Corrosive Wave out of a boss reward instead of Adrenaline. But this card is good in literally every deck that you can put it in. You would take an infinite number of Adrenaline, so of course it's going into S tier. Honestly, there's just not that much to say. It's just always good. Afterimage. Afterimage is a 1-cost power with whenever you play a card, gain 1 block. Now, this block is not affected by dexterity, so it's always going to be 1 block no matter how much dexterity you have, but of course you can play a lot of cards in a turn and get a ton of block out of it. When upgraded, it gains innate, meaning that it starts in your opening hand, and this is one of the innate upgrades that I think is actually worth getting. It's not as high priority an upgrade as other cards that gain more total stats, but starting with Afterimage in your hand makes your deck significantly more consistent because you get a lot of extra block. This card, at worst, is 2 block the turn that you play it and 3 block every turn thereafter. That's kind of the worst case scenario for the card, but often it's going to be way more than that because the Silent has a lot of free cards, like Prepared, Calculated Gamble, Neutralize, starts in your deck and is free, and will give you 1 extra block. And, of course, a deck with Afterimage is going to be interested in playing a lot of free cards. And if you have Shivs or other cards that create more 0-cost cards, then you can play way more than 3 cards in a turn with Afterimage and end up with a lot of block every turn. Even in the worst case scenario, though, 2 block the turn you play it and 3 block every turn thereafter would be an okay power. It's a low amount for 1 energy, but given that that's the floor, that's not horrible. And it obviously just gets better from there the more 0-cost cards you have in your hand. If you have extra energy generation in some way, then of course it's extremely good in that way. Sly cards get played as your 4th card very frequently. So in the sort of realistic case for this card, you're usually getting 4 or 5 block out of it every turn. 4 or 5 block every turn is really strong and just makes the elite fights and boss fights in which this is best, but also hallway fights, significantly easier because you are just going to be taking a lot less damage when you have Afterimage in play. It's just a very powerful, very strong card, and another component of the Silent's excellent defensive setup. It rewards you for doing something you already want to do, play a lot of cards in a turn. Either the Shiv deck or the cycling Sly deck for the Silent are going to be doing that, and so Afterimage just is always excellent in basically any deck that can support it in any way. I'm going to give it S tier because for the Silent, I think this is, again, one of the really strong defensive tools, and one that you're always going to prioritize very highly. Next up, Assassinate. Assassinate is a 0-cost attack with innate, so it starts in your first hand, that deals 10 damage, applies 1 vulnerable, and exhausts. When upgraded, it deals 13 damage and applies 2 vulnerable. Now, at first glance, this looks really good, and I think on any other character, this card would be significantly better than it is for the Silent. And it's still certainly not a bad card, but it's not as strong as it looks at first. Having innate on a card like this, I think, is actually a downside, because on the first turn, the Silent very often wants to set up powers and apply weakness, apply poison, play the effects that are available to the character that work over time. And so the drawing this card instead of one of your footworks or noxious fumes or something like that can make it harder to get your core combos online in order to win the encounter more easily. Secondly, because you want to play cards like poison cards and powers on the first turn, the vulnerability is a little bit harder to make use of than it would be for another character, because a lot of your best damage tools on the Silent don't attack and don't interact with vulnerable. And you also can't, you're also going to be spending a lot of energy on the first turn on things that aren't just pure attacks. Now, that being said, it's still a very powerful effect. 10 damage and 1 vulnerable for 0 is obviously a great ratio, and 2 turns of vulnerable for 0 when upgraded is an incredible ratio. And so in a Silent deck that attacks at all, or even in just a Silent deck that's using poison but wants a little bit of extra damage at the start of fights, this is still a really solid overall card. I just think it's a little easy to overrate this because it costs 0, and so people see it and think, I'm just making my deck better by putting it in the deck. But drawing this card instead of a card that gives you long-term value on the first turn of combat is a real penalty. And so you need to make sure that the 10 damage and 1 vulnerable is better than the average other card that you could draw in your opening hand. I'm going to give Assassinate A tier because it's obviously still really good. And, you know, it's free, it exhausts, so in fights that you don't want it in, it's not going to come back. And it's extremely strong in Silent decks that are attacking. If you're a Shiv deck, if you're reliant on pinpoints and things like that in order to do your damage, then Assassinate is very powerful. But I did want to mention that this card has real downsides, and I think it's easy to overrate it. Blade of Ink. So Blade of Ink is the card that was changed in the most recent patch, the 0.105 patch. It is a 1-cost skill that adds 2 inky shivs to your hand. So these are shivs with the inky enchantment. And when upgraded, it adds 3 of them. Inky increases the damage of the shiv by 1. It used to be 2, now it's 1, and applies 1 turn of weakness. So when you play Blade of Ink, you get effectively 10 damage and 2 turns of weakness for the unupgraded version, or 15 damage and 3 turns of weakness for the upgraded version. 10 damage and 2 turns of weakness is exactly the same as Sucker Punch, which I've put in C tier here, when upgraded. And the thing about Sucker Punch is that while the unupgraded version isn't great, the upgraded version is pretty strong, and you'll pretty often take it if you find it already upgraded. And Blade of Ink is significantly better than that, even unupgraded, because it You can split up the damage across multiple enemies, so you can use this, of course, to kill a low health enemy and still weaken a higher health enemy. You can split the weakness across multiple enemies, so if you have 2 enemies making big attacks that turn, then you can weaken both of them. And because it's shivs, it benefits from all of the synergy that you get with shivs if you're in a deck with shiv synergy. And it, double applies strength. So if you have extra strength, if you have effects like Envenom that trigger every time you attack, or effects like Serpent Form that trigger every time you play a card, you get a lot of extra value out of this. When upgraded, it's really strong. 1 energy for 3 turns of weakness is really good. And the fact that you get 5 whole extra damage and an extra turn of weakness for upgrading makes this one of the most efficient upgrades available in the game, and so a pretty high priority to upgrade. Even unupgraded, though, this is a very powerful card. I'm going to give it A tier because while it is obviously excellent, at the end of the day, it is still just 1 cost for 10 damage and some weakness, and so there are maybe times where you would want something else over it. But it is a very, very strong card that you're usually going to be pretty happy to put in your deck. Bullet Time. Bullet Time is a 3-cost skill that says you cannot draw additional cards this turn, so after you play it, all your card draw doesn't work. And all cards in your hand are free to play this turn. So basically, if you play it with 4 other cards in your hand, you're up 1 energy, if they're all other 1-cost cards. If you play it with 9 other cards in your hand, you're up 6 energy, if they're all 1-cost cards, because you spent 3 on it, and then you get to play 9 cards. When upgraded, it only costs 2, which mostly doesn't matter because you're going to spend your whole turn casting Bullet Time, but does have the advantage of letting you cast card draw that costs energy, like Acrobatics or something like that, before playing Bullet Time, so that you can get extra value from the energy that this gives you. The downside of this card, of course, is that it's going to be a dead draw reasonably often. If you draw it with 3 other playable cards and a curse, then it doesn't do anything. If you draw it alongside Prepared, then you don't get any value because Prepared is cards in hand negative, and so Prepared is if you play Prepared first, then you're only going to be able to cast 3 cards that cost energy. It's also not great with Sly cards, which you can often play for free by discarding them, though if you don't have any discard outlets in hand, then it can maybe work with some of the more expensive Sly cards. The upside of this card is really, really high. If you've managed to fill your hand beforehand, if you draw it in your opening hand as the Silent, with your Relic that gives you 2 extra cards in your opening hand, then it can be very strong and can be energy positive. But the downside is also pretty severe. It conflicts with a lot of the Silent's best cards, the 0-cost card draw, and unless it's upgraded, it also conflicts with all of your 1-cost card draw as well, because you can't play Bullet Time and then get value off of something like Acrobatics. Even if you do get to play a hand with it, let's say you draw Bullet Time and then 4 other 1-cost cards, what you've gotten out of the Bullet Time is just the ability to play the worst card in your hand for free. Because you could have spent that 3 energy on the other 3 best cards in your hand, and so you're only adding the 4th card to your turn. So there's a lot of times where the upside of this card is just not that significant, and a lot of times where it's basically the same as like a Wisp from Necrobinder, where it's just a 0-cost +1 energy card. And I think that doesn't make up for how inconsistent this card is. Because it conflicts with a lot of the best things that the Silent is trying to do, and because while the upside is high, it's fairly rare and somewhat awkward to make it work. Bullet Time, I think, in general, unless you have a specific deck or you have extra energy generation and a lot of 1-cost card draw to draw into a bunch of cards and then play them for free with Bullet Time, is usually just not going to do that much. In the hardest fights as well, you'll often draw curses alongside this and get no value out of it. And so I think in general, this card is awkward and best avoided. I'm going to put it in D tier, though obviously there are some really, really fun things that you can do with this card. It's dangerous, it's very often a dead draw, and it's hard to make work. Burst. Burst is a 1-cost skill that reads, this turn, your next skill is played in extra time. So you play this, and then whatever skill you play after it, you play 2 copies of. When upgraded, it goes the next 2 skills that you play are played an extra time. By default, this is just an extra copy of the best skill in your hand, which is already pretty good. Obviously, it's really good when you're doubling up on a 2-cost card, so bursting a leg sweep or something like that is quite powerful. But even just doubling up on a card like Blur for 2 turns of Blur, Dodge and Roll to get a really good block this turn and next turn is really strong. And at worst, this is usually just an extra copy of Defend, which obviously isn't great, but as a fallback case isn't the end of the world. Of course, this card can miss when you don't draw it alongside any other skills, and it's very bad when that happens. But since the Silent will usually have a deck composed of like 80% skills, the likelihood of that happening is relatively low. It's bad when it does, but you usually won't run into it. That means that when unupgraded, Burst is a fine card, not amazing, but one that you're moderately happy to have around, and happier to have around if you have lots of 2-cost skills in your deck. Most notably, it's really good for doubling Leg Sweep, and it's really good for doubling Blur, because those cards really benefit from being played twice. When upgraded, this card changes completely, though. Doubling the next 2 skills that you play is card and energy positive. So if you play Burst and then play Dodge and Roll and Blur after it, then suddenly you have a huge amount of block this turn and next turn. It also, when upgraded, works with Sly cards. So if you play Burst and then double cast a Prepared, which obviously is energy negative, but still double casting Prepared is good, then when you discard a Haze, you just play 2 Hazes, and so you've gotten a huge amount of value off of that. Double casting Acrobatics into double casting whatever Sly card you discard is also incredible. And so it works really well with Sly. It also just works well with having 2 other good skills in your hand. And even in the worst case scenario where you draw it, well, not the worst case, but the second worst case scenario where you draw upgraded Burst and only 1 other 1-cost skill, it's still totally fine. If you miss completely, again, it's bad, but outside of that relatively unlikely case, this is always going to give you a pretty decent value, and the top end is incredible. I'm going to give Burst A tier because it's usually going to be at least good, and sometimes it's going to be amazing. Corrosive Wave. Corrosive Wave is a skill that goes, whenever you draw a card this turn, apply 2 poison to all enemies, or when upgraded, 3 poison to all enemies. This card was nerfed. It used to be 3 and then 4, I think. And now is still pretty good at 2 and 3. It was incredibly busted before. This is one of the easiest ways to set up a win condition for the Silent. This card will often just win every fight by itself once you put it in the deck and start building around it. Obviously, you need lots of card draw in order to enable it, but the Silent is usually going to pick up as much card draw as it can find, and playing Corrosive Wave and then playing just an Acrobatics or a Backflip is totally reasonable. 1 cost for 4 poison to all enemies is already fine, and this can often be 1 cost for 10 or 12 poison to all enemies, even before you upgrade it, and so that can be an extremely powerful tool. The longer the fight goes, the better this gets as well, because your deck is usually going to get smaller as you pull powers out of it, as you exhaust the exhaustible cards, and so you're going to be able to cycle through your card draw more frequently, and so Corrosive Wave benefits really strongly from that. It's particularly good with a couple specific cards. It's great with Calculated Gamble, which can often draw like 5 cards and still give you a full hand of cards that you can play after playing it, so really strong combination there. And it's really, really good with Outbreak, because it applies the poison in individual instances, so it's going to trigger Outbreak over and over again. Also good with the Relic that increases all poison that you apply by 1. Corrosive Wave, you're not going to want more than 1 of this card usually, but it's one of the best win conditions for the Silent, and I'll usually take it and try to build around it, so I'm going to give it A tier. Echoing Slash. Echoing Slash is 1 cost for 10 damage to all enemies, and for each enemy killed, you repeat this effect. So if you play it and it kills 1 enemy, it's going to do 20 damage to everything. And then if that continues to kill stuff, of course you can chain it for a huge amount of additional damage. When upgraded, it does 13 damage to all enemies. Now, the secondary effect of Echoing Slash is not that exciting. Sometimes you're going to get an extra 10 AoE damage out of it, and obviously in encounters where that happens, it's really strong. But most of the time, this is just going to be one cost for 10 area of effect damage. But that's already pretty good. The Silent really needs AoE damage in general, and this is already 2 more of it than Dagger Spray gives you, with the potential for being really strong in encounters with summons, which is where you want AoE damage against like weak summons, and in encounters like the Phantasmal Gardeners, where there's just a lot of relatively low health enemies, or against the Frogmite, or Frogmite, that's a magic card, the Frog Parasite. And so this has significant upside with its secondary effect, even if it comes up very rarely. But mostly the effect of this card is just that it's a decent AoE damage card on rate. You're almost always going to take this if you see it in Act 1. If you see it as a boss reward, you're probably going to take one of the other rares over it, but it's still a totally okay card, and I'm going to give it B tier. Envenom. Envenom is a 2-cost power that says whenever an attack deals unblocked damage to an enemy, apply 1 poison. When upgraded, it applies 2 poison. This is a card you really want to upgrade in order to get value out of it, and of course you need a lot of attacks, so the natural place for Envenom is in a Shiv deck. The problem with that is that Shiv decks often don't have a lot of poison synergy, and both poison and Shivs are somewhat parasitic mechanics, meaning that they play really well with more of that mechanic and not as well when cross-combined with other types of mechanics. So Envenom is a weird card in that it adds a bunch of poison stuff to Shiv decks. By default, this is, when unupgraded, this is just +1 damage on all of your Shivs. But it can be significantly more than that when upgraded, when combined with other poison cards, when combined with cards that replay themselves. So like Dagger Spray, for example, applies 2 poison to everything when you have Envenom. And it works well with cards that generate multiple Shivs, which are often the best Shiv cards. So things like Blade Dance or Hidden Daggers play out fairly well with Envenom. The real problem, though, is just that it's super expensive. You have to spend 2 energy on it up front, and then you need to play a lot of attacks before you get good value out of this card. And so most of the time, it's going to be fairly hard to actually use it. I'm going to give it C tier because in a very specific deck that can make good use of it, it's pretty powerful. It's just very rare that you're going to be in that deck, and you should usually try not to take this card unless you already have a lot of the support for it. Fan of Knives. Fan of Knives is a 2-cost power that makes your Shivs now hit all enemies. So instead of 0 cost 4 damage to one target, it's 0 cost 4 damage to all targets, and adds 4 Shivs into your hand. So when you play it, it's 16 AoE damage the turn you play it. When upgraded, the image here is broken, but when upgraded, it adds 5 Shivs into your hand when you play it, so basically it's 20 AoE damage. 16 AoE damage for 2 cost is basically like playing 2 Dagger Sprays. But having 2 Dagger Sprays stapled together is actually quite a bit better than just having a Dagger Spray in your deck, because when you want AoE damage in an encounter, you want a lot of it so that it actually kills the large number of enemies that you're facing off against. And the main downside of Dagger Spray is that you can draw it in the late game and have it just be not that impactful a card, because these sorts of effects of 1 energy for a little bit of damage just fall off when you want your card draws to all be better than that. So even though it's a little less flexible because it costs 2, stapling 2 Dagger Sprays together I think is a lot better than having 2 Dagger Sprays in your deck. And better even than just having 1 Dagger Spray in your deck, just because of how it works in actual practice. Fan of Knives also benefits, of course, from any synergy that you have with Shivs. Very good with accuracy, which would, be 16 extra AoE damage if you have accuracy in play ahead of time. Very good with strength. It's incredible with Blade of Ink, applying AoE weakness to everything if you are lucky enough to get that combination. So there's a lot of synergy that you can have with Fan of Knives alongside other Shiv cards. It's a nice lingering effect on top of an initial effect that's already pretty solid. And so the way to think of this is less as a power and more as an attack that happens to leave a pretty good bonus behind itself. As an attack, this card is already pretty good, and as a power, alongside other Shiv cards, this card is also very solid. So Fan of Knives as a total package, I think, is great. This is one of the cards that is most likely to draw me into wanting to play a Shiv deck if I get Fan of Knives early, because it goes well with basically everything else. It solves a lot of the problems that Shiv decks have of not being able to deal with AoE enemies. And there's a lot of other small things like bypassing enemies that you can't target that turn, stuff like that. So Fan of Knives is going to be really powerful. It's still, at the end of the day, just a 2-cost, 16 damage AoE attack, which isn't like the best on rate, but it has so many synergies that I tend to find that I really like this card, and if I get it early, I'm usually going to play around it. I'm a little torn between putting it in A or B, and I think at the end of the day I am going to give it B tier just because there are enough times where you play this, where you draw it and it's awkward to get it into play because it costs 2 and doesn't help defend you, and against boss fights and stuff like that it's a little bit worse, but this is, I think, one of the draws to playing the Shiv deck. Grand Finale. Grand Finale is a 0-cost attack that can only be played if there are no cards in your draw pile. So you have to have drawn exactly your entire deck and not overdrawn and triggered a reshuffle. And if you can play it, it deals 60 damage to all enemies or 75 when upgraded. Now, obviously, this is a high-risk, high-reward card. There are lots of times where you draw it where you can't play Grand Finale, but weirdly, it's been a little easier to set up than I was kind of expecting because the Silent has so many good common and uncommon draw pieces, and so you can often arrange to reach 0 cards in hand with careful management of your deck. This card is also very hard to play with. You need to be very comfortable with the game's draw mechanics and with counting the cards left in your deck and playing around averages in order to reliably trigger Grand Finale. But when you do get to play it, it's obviously massive. 60 AoE damage is going to win most fights in Act 1 and 2 by itself, and then even in Act 3 it's going to be very relevant. In a deck built around using this can be very powerful. By the end game, it often becomes too unreliable and maybe you want to remove it from your deck. I actually have a video where I got Grand Finale and used it on the Silent, and it did way better than I was expecting. I was expecting it to be useless. So I'm going to give it C tier because if you can manage to get a deck where this is good, the upside is incredible, though most decks, you're going to want something else. Knife Trap. Knife Trap is a 2-cost skill with play every Shiv in your exhaust pile, so every Shiv that you've played so far this combat, on the enemy. Whatever you target with it, it's going to get hit by every Shiv you've played up until that point. When upgraded, it upgrades the Shivs first, so they'll deal 6 damage instead of the 4 damage that they do unupgraded. Knife Trap is basically reverse accuracy. Accuracy doubles the damage of all of your Shivs, if you play it before you play all of the Shivs. Knife Trap doubles the damage of all the Shivs if you play it after you've played all the Shivs, which is better because if you draw Knife Trap too early, you can just wait until you've cycled through your deck before playing it. If you draw Accuracy too late, then you've lost quite a bit of value on the accuracy. But is it worth spending 2 instead of spending 1 for what's essentially the same effect? Usually not. Knife Trap does have some bonuses over accuracy in that it benefits, it's going to also double the damage of any accuracies that you have. It's going to also double the damage of any strength that you have, whereas accuracy just adds flat +4. But most of the time, this is basically just doubling the damage of the Shivs in your deck if you play it later in the combat, and spending 2 on that effect instead of spending 1 on that effect just isn't particularly strong. Knife Trap also has the problem that it'll often overkill enemies. If you've played a bunch of Shivs in a combat already and have therefore damaged a bunch of enemies already with those Shivs, by the time you play Knife Trap, you may just not need as much damage as it gives you, and so it's going to do its damage less granularly and less accurately than accuracy will, which makes it a little bit more awkward to use. Also, if you go in really long fights, accuracy is going to provide its damage value every single time you draw a Shiv card, having spent only 1 energy on it, whereas Knife Trap, you need to replay it every deck cycle in order to get the bonus value. There are some times where it's really strong. It's very, very good with Blade of Ink, because it does replay the Inky Shivs. And there's a few other things that it gets pretty good value from, but mostly Knife Trap is just going to be a really awkward and expensive accuracy, and is not going to be one of the Shiv cards that you're really interested in adding. D tier. Malaise. Malaise is an X cost skill, where the enemy loses X strength, so it's going to use all of your remaining energy, and the enemy will lose X strength and apply X turns of weakness, and then you exhaust the Malaise. When upgraded, it's X plus 1 strength loss and weakness. This is a card that was incredible in Slay the Spire 1, and I think is still quite good in Slay the Spire 2, but not as good as it was in STS 1, because more enemies gain strength over time, so costing enemies strength is a little bit less valuable, and there's a few more ways for the Silent to interact with effects like this, and so Malaise is less of an important defensive card than it was in the first game. I think that's why you sometimes see people overrating this card a little bit. That being said, it's still a very good card. If you play it for 1, -1 strength and 1 turn of weakness is fine. And because it's flexible, it can be pretty good, especially in elite and boss fights, and very strong in certain elite and boss fights. And when it's not good, you can always just play it for 0 in order to exhaust it and get it out of the deck. When upgraded, it's really strong. A 0 cost, -1 strength, and 1 turn of weakness isn't quite as good as Neutralize, but it's getting close, and almost no card in the game is as good as Neutralize. And that -1 strength, of course, is going to last for the rest of the combat, so it gives you quite a lot of value over time. And if you play it for 1, 2 turns of weakness for 1 cost, -2 strength for 1 cost, these are both totally reasonable effects, and so you're pretty happy to have that. This being both powerful and flexible makes it pretty good. You want to avoid putting too many of this type of effect in your deck, because there are lots of times where you draw it where it's not particularly strong, and you're just going to end up exhausting it for 0. But the first Malaise is always going to be pretty nice, because you can always just get rid of it in fights that are that you don't want it in. A tier for Malaise, and I think that this is a pretty potent defensive tool. Master Planner. This is a 2-cost power with when you play a skill, it gains Sly, 1 cost when upgraded. In longer fights, this basically makes every skill in your deck free, because you play it and then it gains Sly, and then you can discard it and play it for free, if you have enough Sly enablers. That if you have enough Sly enablers, of course, is the trick. You need a lot of ways to discard cards in order to make Master Planner good, but when it's good, it's really good. In longer fights, being able to add Sly to effects like Acrobatics and then play them for free off of Prepared, and then the Acrobatics can chain into other Sly cards and play those for free, can set up infinite combos. It can set up just chaining through your entire deck for like 1 or 2 energy. It can set up huge turns with things like Corrosive Wave. So it ends up being really, really strong once you've gotten it working. You do need a pretty specific setup in order to make it work. You need a longer fight, because it doesn't do anything the first time through your deck, basically, because you have to play the card before it gains Sly. And you need a lot of Sly enablers, but in those types of fights, which of course are elites and boss fights, which are what you're often building for, this card is really strong. I would usually want to have at least 1 prepared and 1 other good Sly enabler in the deck before I am interested in Master Planner, or before I think Master Planner is really powerful. But the high end on this is good enough that I will often take this card even before I have those cards. And since we're already going to be taking every prepared and calculated gamble and acrobatics we see, I don't think that that's a massive cost. I'm going to give it A tier, because you obviously don't want more than 1 of these, and there are decks that can't use it and fights where it's not good, but in the fights where it is good, it's amazing. Murder. Murder is a 3-cost attack that deals 1 damage and 1 extra damage for each card you've drawn this combat. When upgraded, it only costs 2. By default, of course, this has a minimum of 8 damage, because you're going to draw 7 cards on the first turn, and it counts cards that you draw not during your turn, just any card that you've drawn. And then, obviously, is just going to keep scaling up throughout the fight. 3 cost for 8 damage, of course, is terrible, so if you draw this in your opening hand, it's useless. And it's mostly useless if you draw it basically the first full time through your deck. Even decks with a lot of card draw, in order to spend 3 energy on an attack, you usually want it to kill the enemy, so you want to have drawn, 30, 40 cards in that combat, which usually means at least 1 full deck cycle, or often multiples, before this card becomes efficient. When upgraded, it's better, because 2 cost for 25 damage is a totally reasonable card play, but even that requires you to draw it either at the bottom of your deck, or after cycling through your entire deck once. Adding a card where the upside requires you to have drawn your whole deck multiple times over and isn't even that powerful. I mean, compare it to Master Planner, which makes every card in your deck free. This just does a decent amount of damage at an okay rate. I just don't think it's worth having a dead draw early on. D tier for Murder. I wish this card was better because it's very cool, but the numbers just aren't there. Nightmare. Nightmare is a 3-cost skill. Choose a card, and next turn, add 3 copies of that card into your hand, and then exhaust Nightmare. When upgraded, it only costs 2. So the turn that you play this card, it does nothing, though obviously it can set up for some really powerful turns in the future. Being able to Nightmare for multiple acrobatics, multiple prepareds, multiple escape plans can set up for really nice turns. Nightmare for triple footwork can be really strong. It can give you a lot of bonuses. And these are 3 real copies of the card, so you don't have to play them all the turn that you get them. You'll shuffle them into the deck, which means that you can get quite a bit of value just by putting good cards into your deck with Nightmare. Very good with 0-cost cyclers, like Escape Plan, though you need to find a turn where you can play it where spending 2 energy on a card that does nothing the turn that you play it is possible, which obviously isn't always the case. It also can set up for some ridiculous combos. There are plenty of ways that this card can just do some of the most insane things possible in the game. But most of the time, this card's going to be pretty awkward to use and is going to basically just be designed to make your deck better over longer fights by adding a couple strong powers or a couple strong cyclers or just generally good cards into your deck. And most of the time, I don't think that that is going to be worth it, because the turn that you spend setting up Nightmare in order to add those extra cards into your deck, you could have played something that does something that turn, or just had better cards in your deck in the first place and not having taken Nightmare. I'm going to give it C tier because it does have some really cool applications, and there are some very powerful things that you can do with it, but most decks, this is just going to be very hard to use effectively. Next up, Serpent Form. Serpent Form is a 3-cost power with whenever you play a card, deal 4 damage to a random enemy, or when upgraded, 6 damage. This is a funny card for me because on the face of it, this card looks pretty bad. You have to spend 3 energy on a power that does nothing the turn that you play it, and then you have to play a lot of cards in order to get the value out of it that you might want. But for me, every time I've put this card in my deck, I've won the run. And so I feel like it's weirdly better than it looks on the face of it. And honestly, I'm not totally sure why that is. The main synergy, of course, is with decks that are playing a lot of cards. So it's good with Shivs. Basically works like Accuracy with Shivs, where it doubles the damage of all of them. And it's good with all of your other cards, giving you value over time. And it does synergize with the Silence main plan of sitting behind block, playing a bunch of Sly cards, which will often be, 16 damage a turn with Serpent Form, and killing enemies with value over time engines. That said, it's still pretty bad on rate. 3 energy for 4 damage every time you play a card is really rough to make use of, and there are lots of fights where they just don't go long enough for Serpent Form to be good. This is one that I am definitely having some trouble putting in a solid rating position. I think I'm going to give it C tier, because the numbers on it are just not amazing, but with the caveat that I feel like this card could easily, as I get more experience playing with it, obviously the game's somewhat new and I've only had a few runs with Serpent Form, move up in tiers, because every time I've played this card, it's overperformed my expectations. Shadow Step. Shadow Step is a 1-cost skill with discard your hand, next turn attacks deal double damage, or 0 cost when upgraded. Discard your hand is mostly an advantage in Slay the Spire, though discard your entire hand is a little bit worse than discard specific cards, because you'll often catch something like a Daze or your Ascender's Bane in the Crossfire, and therefore not etherealize them. And the fact that this card does nothing on the turn that you play it definitely makes it harder to justify spending 1 energy on it. Now, doubling the damage of all of your attacks obviously has very high upside, and so you might, if you play a big attack next turn, get like 20 damage out of this card, in which case it's pretty good. The downside is that there's no guarantee that you're going to play a big attack next turn a lot of the time. Obviously, there are cases where you know you're going to draw into a good attack and you know you're going to be able to play it instead of having to block. But many times you will play this card and then just not draw too many attacking cards, or have to spend the turn blocking or playing a power or something, and then it will have done nothing. So when you play this card for 1 energy, it's usually going to be worse than just playing a 1 energy, like 12 damage attack, which you know is going to work. And doesn't have any of the downsides, and actually does stuff that turn, so it can kill enemies before they attack, and so on. When played for 0 energy, this is often free, so if you find this card already upgraded and you're a deck that attacks, you can definitely add it, but if you find this card not upgraded, you're usually not going to want Shadow Step. It's also true that the deck for the Silent that attacks most often is going to be a Shiv deck, where Shadow Step is just a much worse version of Accuracy, where Accuracy is going to double the damage of all of your Shivs forever, and Shadow Step only does that for the ones next turn, alongside some awkward timing rules. And so, most of the time, this is just going to be an awkward and difficult card to add to your deck. I'm going to give it D tier, with the caveat that if you find it already upgraded and you're a deck that already attacks, or if you don't have anything else you need to upgrade, then you can take it and it's okay. Shadowmeld, which is kind of the opposite of Shadow Step. This is a 1-cost skill. Double your block gain this turn, or for 0, double your block gain this turn when upgraded. This is a card that I severely underrated at first. I thought that this was similar to Shadow Step, just an awkward, basically you're adding an extra defend to your hand a lot of the time. But Shadowmeld is actually really, really strong. It works very well with a lot of the Silent's other cards. In particular, it's extremely strong with Blur, so you can carry over more block to next turn. It's extremely strong with Dodge and Roll for the same reason. It works really well with Dexterity, because it doubles the value of all of the Dexterity that you have. And so if you play Shadowmeld and Anticipate in the same turn, or if you have Dexterity already available, then you're doubling the value of all of that. And a lot of the time for the Silent, your plan is just to get a huge amount of block on dangerous turns and carry over some of that block to future turns. And so Shadowmeld actually helps you do that very well. It's not an effect you want too many copies of, because there are plenty of turns where you draw this and it's a dead card. But when you get this, when you play this for 1, it's often at worst an extra defend, which is obviously bad, but still, again, not an embarrassing fail case, like not a completely embarrassing fail case. And when you play it for 0, it's really good. And the top end of this card is amazing when combined with a lot of the Silent's other important defensive cards. I'm going to give it A tier, because overall I think that this card has actually performed astonishingly well for me. Next up, Storm of Steel. This is a 1-cost skill where you discard your hand, and then add 1 Shiv into your hand for each card discarded, or when upgraded, you add an upgraded Shiv into your hand for each card discarded. At first glance, this looks pretty good, because it's usually going to be 1 cost for a bunch of damage. You know, you discard 6 cards, you get 24 damage for 1 cost. But actually playing this card is really awkward. In order to use it in an energy-efficient way, it needs to be the last card that you play in a turn. So you're playing 2 other cards first. And then you need to have a lot of cards still remaining in hand. most 5 cards hands, this is going to be just 1 cost for 2 shivs, which is a very bad rate. And there are lots of times where you'll have wanted to play a prepared or something first and have decreased the number of cards in your hand, because again, this is one of your best cards and decreases the total number of cards in your hand, which makes Storm of Steel significantly worse. It is good with Retain, so cards like Well-Laid Plan and Snakebite work very well with Storm of Steel. It's okay if you draw it on your first turn, because you can play 2 other cards and then play Storm of Steel, discard 4 cards and get 4 shivs, and then you get 16 damage for 1. And so in those cases, it's all right. But most of the time, I think it's just not really worth playing around this card. And the failure case is very poor, where you're playing it for 1 or 2 shivs. And it also is somewhat awkward. Again, discarding your whole hand is a little more awkward than discarding specific cards, because it will often force you to keep the Ascender's Bane in your deck, to keep Dazes in your deck, and so on. So I just don't think that this card is worth the effort. Even if you get the kind of maximum value out of it, it's not even incredibly exciting in that case, and the failure cases are very poor. The Hunt. I'm going to skip Suppress for now. I'll talk about the ancient cards at the end. The Hunt is a 1-cost attack that deals 10 damage or 15 when upgraded, and if fatal, so if it kills the enemy that you target with it, you get an extra card reward after that combat. It then exhausts. On rate, this isn't, an amazing card. A 1-cost, 10 damage, exhausting attack would be a fine thing to add to your deck on floor like 1 or 2, but later in the game isn't going to be that exciting. But an extra card reward is ridiculously strong. Card rewards are one of the best things that you get in Slay the Spire. It's one of the best ways to make your deck stronger, is to add cards to it. And because it's a full card reward, you just get to skip it if it's a card that isn't good. So it's going to help you find your synergies, find powerful cards more frequently, and so on when you get these extra card rewards. It's not as difficult as it might sound like to trigger this, though it's a little more awkward for the Silent than for other characters, because often enemies will die to poison, and so you need to draw the Hunt at the right time in order to actually get lethal with it. But the Silent is also very good at stalling fights, and so you can often just stall through an entire deck cycle to redraw the Hunt and kill the last remaining enemy, while having taken no damage, because you just play all your good defensive cards in the meantime. If you trigger this like 3 or 4 times in a run, it makes your deck massively stronger, and so it's very much worth going out of your way to do that. And even in the worst case scenario where it's very bad in a fight and you're not going to be able to get a kill with it, you can spend 1 energy to exhaust it. So the opportunity cost for adding it to your deck isn't that ridiculous. I'm going to give it A tier because you never want more than 1 copy of this card, but and there are times when it's somewhat awkward, it's a little bit weak on rate, but the amount of value that you can get out of it if you get it early in a run is ridiculous. Tools of the Trade. Tools of the Trade is a 1-cost power with, at the start of your turn, draw a card and then discard a card, or 0 cost when upgraded. What have we talked about? Basically every single card when playing the Silent. Drawing cards and discarding cards is good. Sly is the best mechanic for this character, so Tools of the Trade not only accelerates through your deck faster to find the cards that you need, so even if you have 0 Sly cards in the deck, this is still a good card. It also is often going to be a huge amount of extra energy in addition to drawing an extra card every turn, because if you play a Sly card off it, then the discard is +1 card rather than -1 card. It costs 0 when upgraded, so there's like no cost to putting it in your deck. Tools of the Trade is just incredible. This is another card that you basically always want. S tier. It's taking a while to scroll up to the top, but S tier. And finally, for rare cards, Tracking. Tracking is a 2-cost power where weak enemies take double damage from attacks, or 1 cost when upgraded. So I'm going to say that Tracking is a card that I have not I've only managed to get once in a run. So my confidence level on this rating is a little bit lower than most of these other cards. So keep that in mind as I talk about the card. Tracking is very powerful, of course, if you're attacking, because you want enemies to be weakened all the time when you're playing the Silent. And between Leg Sweep and Neutralize and now Blade of Ink, There's a lot of ways that you can apply weakness, and doubling the damage of all of your attacks is obviously good if you're attacking. It only works on attacks, so it doesn't double the damage of poison, it doesn't double the damage of effects like Speedster and Serpent Form, but for a Shiv deck or a deck that's mostly using attack, the discard attacks like Ricochet, Flick Flack, attacks like Pinpoint, then it's going to be doubling the damage of basically all of your attacks, especially in longer fights where you want to have the enemy permanently weakened. Costing 2 upfront is pretty bad, though costing 1 is, when upgraded, it's a lot more exciting, so usually you're going to want to heavily prioritize upgrading this card. Most silent decks probably are not going to be able to use it that easily because you try not to have too many attacks in silent decks, but for ones where you have a lot of attacks, it's very powerful. I think I'm going to give it B tier because I think that it is very good in a fairly narrow range of silent decks, but for the decks that can use it, it's very strong. Though again, like I've said, I've only actually managed to play with this card once, so my confidence rating on this rating is not that high. I'm open to your experiences with the card as well. Next up, the Ancient cards. So this is Suppress and Wraith Form that you get from rewards from the Ancients. These are mostly Ancient rewards, so they're really relics that add a card to your deck more than they are cards. So I'm not going to talk too much about them, but I will mention how they work. Suppress is a 0-cost innate attack that deals 11 damage and applies 3 turns of weakness, or when upgraded, 17 damage and 5 turns of weakness. Obviously, this card is incredibly powerful. I don't think it's one of the best Ancient rewards, and so you won't often end up with this card in your deck because you won't select it at the Ancient that much. But when you do have it in your deck, of course, it's insane, so we're going to put it in S tier. And finally, Wraith Form. Wraith Form is a 3-cost power that gives you 2 intangible, also available from an Ancient, or 3 intangible when upgraded, reducing all incoming damage to 1. And at the start of your turn, you lose 1 dexterity. This was a broken card in Slay the Spire 1, and it's still broken in Slay the Spire 2. It's super powerful. I think that this is worth taking as an Ancient reward. And will often be very, very good. It's just incredible for letting you take minimal damage while setting up a bunch of really powerful things. You, of course, want to prioritize upgrading it because 3 turns of intangible is great. You don't have to play it on the first cycle through the deck as well. You can wait until later cycles if you're worried about the dexterity loss. But 3 turns should be enough for most non-boss fights. And for boss fights, this gives you a lot of free turns of taking very little damage at the point in the fight where you need it most. So Wraith Form, of course, also incredible, also going into S tier, which obviously you would expect from an Ancient card reward. Finally, I wanted to mention a couple neutral cards that are particularly good for the Silent. A lot of these are very good cards for every character, but especially powerful for the Silent. Automation, you're going to draw a lot of cards, and the Silent has trouble getting energy generation, so automation is a pretty high priority pickup. Fasten is even better for you than it is for most characters, because you have an extra defend in your deck, so it affects 1 more card, giving 5 additional blocks to defense, and sitting behind defenses is exactly what the Silent wants to do, so Fasten gives you a lot of value there. Finesse is better for you as well, because cycling through your deck is what you want to do, and you're going to have Dexterity in order to make the 0-cost blocking card a little bit better. And Impatience, you will often have very, very few attacks in a Silent deck, and so you're very likely to be able to play this just as a 0-cost draw too. So there's a few, obviously there's many more neutral cards, but those are some that I really wanted to mention as being particularly valuable for the Silent. So, taking a look at the full list here, I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to make a clean screenshot if that's something that you're looking at to do as well. The thing that I think is most notable about the Silent is how good the top-end cards are. You have so many cards that are just generically good in almost every Silent deck. Basically, regardless of your plan, you're always going to be happy with a lot of these S-tier cards. And the core plan for the Silent is really solid and really powerful just at base, which is why I think it's one of the the strongest and sort of most consistent character in Slay the Spire 2 right now. Being able to set up a lot of block and have that block be draw agnostic, because it's based on things like blur, dodge and roll, and footwork, so it's going to work turn over turn, even if you draw it on a turn where enemies are not attacking, means that you take way less damage than most other characters, and your win conditions being so stable, because it comes from poison, noxious fumes, and cards like that you just play once, and then it'll slowly kill enemies for you, gives you a lot of inevitability in longer fights. That's why the best cards for the Silent focus on enhancing that plan. And at the top end, other than a couple of combo cards like Corrosive Wave, you're mostly focusing on selecting cards that are going to help you defend yourself and that will win the fights by themselves in order to allow you to gain all of this value from your really strong, generically powerful cards. At the lower end, you also have a lot of solid role players. You have plenty of cards that are good for getting you through some hallway fights. You have cards that are good for getting you through boss fights. In general, the Silence card pool is good against elites and bosses and worse against hallway enemies, is another thing that's kind of notable from looking at it all together here. But you should usually be able to get at least a couple powerful tools and to win elite fights, and okay tools to win hallway fights, cards like Poison Stab and so on, in order to get you through Dangerous Act 1. You also have a lot of options to build into very specific fun decks with cards like Serpent Form and Envenom that can really go off. Another thing that I think is notable looking at this entire tier list at once is that I think the Shiv cards need a small buff on rate. A lot of the Shiv cards are just numerically not that strong, and so cards like Cloak and Dagger, I think, could gain like 1 extra block, and that would make it a lot more playable. So during early access, I'm hoping to see that, and the Shiv stuff could be brought a little bit more into line with the poison stuff. Not that Shivs are bad right now, but a lot of the individual cards are not as exciting as a lot of the individual cards for Sly or Poison. Overall, the Silent has a lot of different viable strategies, and hopefully this tier list will help you get into all of them. As always, of course, if there are cards that you think that I have misplaced, and in particular cards that you think I am underrating, especially with the rare cards, I may not have enough reps with that card in order to have produced an accurate rating, because of course rare cards are rarer, so you don't get them in as many runs. So let me know in the comments if you think there's a card that I should definitely move, and let me know why. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to leave any form of comment. It helps with the algorithm. Hit the like button for the same reason, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Slay the Spire 2 and other strategy game analysis. Thanks for watching, friends. I'll catch you next time.